So we're going to start a new series today called An Offer You Can Refuse. And I'm really tempted to do the whole thing like this. An offer you can refuse. Okay, right? Just like Marlon Brando from The Godfather. Remember in 1972, The Godfather comes out, and Marlon Brando is Don Vito Corleone, and Johnny Fontane, his nephew, comes up to him and says, I really want this part in a movie, but the head of the studio has said no. And Marlon Brando's like, well, I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse. And next thing you know, there's a horse head in the bed of the head of the studio, and what do you know, Johnny Fontane does get the part, right? And the idea behind that little phrase that makes it into all three of the Godfather movies is that you can create a situation that is either so threatening or so tempting, or you can set up the circumstances in such a way where somebody just wouldn't have a choice. It'd be impossible to say no. Well, that might be true in the movies, but it's not true in our lives. And if you've got your Bibles, I want to tell you a story where Jesus stands up to temptation. It's in Matthew chapter 3, verse 16. We'll start reading. It's on the screens as well. It says, as soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water. At that moment, heaven was opened up. He saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. And a voice from heaven, how cool would this be? This is my Son, whom I love, and with him I am well pleased. And then in chapter 4, verse 1, then Jesus, like immediately, there were no numbered chapters and verses back then. It was just written. They put that there for our reference. So it just immediately, Jesus is baptized. God says that. And then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. You think, right? 40 days and 40 nights. And then it says the tempter came to him. Now we're going to push the pause button right there. And in the next few weeks, we'll look at each of those temptations that Satan gives to Jesus. But today, I just want to talk about temptation in general. Because temptation is complex enough on its own. It's confusing enough on its own. Temptation doesn't make any sense, and I'll show you what I mean. How many of you, and raise your hands on this, how many of you would say, you don't think lying is a good idea? Lying is not good. I don't believe in lying. Look at all the hands around the room. It's like everybody, right? Your parents taught you not to lie. You teach your kids not to lie. You don't want to work for a liar. You don't want your employee to be somebody that can't handle the truth. You don't want either your government to lie to you. You don't want to date a liar. And yet, if I had you raise your hands in this room, none of you believe in lying, but if I had you raise your hands, anybody who's ever told a little white lie. No, I don't. If I had you raise your hand. That's good though, you're in church and so you won't go to hell. All the people that raised your hands, you didn't lie, so that's good. But right, isn't that weird? Like we don't want to do it, we don't want anybody to do it. Here's another example. Adultery. I don't know anybody that says, hey, you know what one of my goals in life is? I want to cheat on my spouse. Like nobody says that. In fact, everybody, like I don't want my parents to do that. I don't want my kids to marry anybody who's going to do that. I don't want my kids to do that. And every one of us, when we stand in front of our friends and family at that altar, we say, I'm going to love you till the day I die, till death parts us. And every one of us means it. Because we wouldn't think in that moment of cheating. And yet how many of us in this room have been impacted by somebody from our past, somebody in our present that is cheating? Like we don't believe in it, yet we do it. Temptation makes no sense. And if you're here today and you have an addictive behavior, goodness, you could write the book on this. Because you hate your addiction. You hate what it does to you. You hate how it makes you feel. You hate what it does to your marriage. You hate what it does to your family. You hate what it does to you financially. And yet so many people would walk out of a service like this and run right back to the addiction. Temptation makes no sense, guys. But guess what? We're in good company. Because there was a guy named Paul, the Apostle Paul. He's the super Christian. He's the guy who writes over half the New Testament. He's the guy who plants churches all over Asia and all over the Greek-speaking nations. And he says in Romans 7:15, he shares with us how much he's struggling with temptation. He says, I don't understand what I do. He said, for what I want to do, I don't do that. But the things that I hate to do, that's what I do. Can you relate to that? Am I the only one that looks in the mirror sometimes and goes, why is it that the stuff that I want to do, I can't seem to get myself to do it? And then there's stuff that I say, man, I hate that. I don't believe in lying. I don't believe in this. I don't believe in that. And yet, guess what? From time to time, I get tempted and I do it. So I want to today expose the complexity of temptation. I want to, pull the curtain back. I want to be your Toto today. Hey, remember in The Wizard of Oz when all the Scarecrow and the Lion and Dorothy and everybody, they're up and the Wizard of Oz and they're so scared of the great and powerful Oz. And then little Toto comes, the dog, and he grabs the curtain and he pulls it. And next thing you know, it's not the great and powerful Oz. It's just some little guy with a megaphone. I want to be your Toto and pull back the curtain from temptation. So I want to share some things with you that I hope will help you see that temptation's just a little guy with a megaphone. And you can win. This is an offer you can refuse. Now, first, the when of temptation. Because if you know when it's coming, you can better be ready for it. And you can win. My brother was walking out of a Skyline Chili. We're from Cincinnati. We're visiting. And I don't know how many of you love Skyline Chili, but you should get to know it because that's all we're going to be serving in heaven. Okay? So Skyline Chili, we're walking out of there. Now, on the way in, my brother was doing this deal with my son, 8 years old. And he's like, come on, hit Uncle Dan in the stomach. Come on. And my son's like, boom, boom. My brother's like, no big deal, right? Because he's crunched. He's ready. We go in, get him a bowl of chili, 2 bowls of chili, 4 bowls of chili, whatever it is. His belly is full of chili. He walks out. My son thinks the game's still going on. Boom! Uncle Dan, my brother, just about loses his chili, okay? But here's the deal. If you're ready for it, it'll help you. So, when does temptation come? Doesn't it come after a big victory? In this story, chapter 3, verse 17, God has just said, this is my son in whom I am well pleased and that I love. Jesus is just baptized. Jesus is getting ready to start his public ministry. This is a win, people. And right after that, Satan is bringing on the temptation. Now, real quick, for the sake of illustration, we're going to let since most of us from time to time will struggle with the temptation of food. Am I right? I mean, some form or another. So we're going to now for you it might be ice cream. For you it might be, cheeseburgers or whatever. For me, we're going to let a donut illustrate temptation. It's purely hypothetical, I assure you. Okay? But here's the deal. So that's temptation. Has this ever happened to you right after a victory? You get up, you get on the scale, and for 2-3 weeks you've been doing good, so that number is low. And you're like, yeah. And then you go get in your car and you're on the way to work, and these are the thoughts that are going through your head. Man, I'm doing good. Man, I tell you what, I deserve to celebrate a little bit. How good I'm doing. And your discipline goes down, and next thing you know, there's a sweet, sugary, thing, and I'm eating a donut. And it makes no sense. But doesn't that happen sometimes? Think about all the times you celebrate after a wedding. The big wedding. Now you go to the reception and temptation. Big promotion at work. How are we going to celebrate? Let's go spend more money than we got in the raise. We do dumb stuff after big victories. That's when temptation will come. I'm going to tell you when else temptation will come. When you're alone. That makes sense, right? I mean, you've experienced that. I mean, the truth is, I am not actually tempted by that donut right now. I'm not. Because all of you could tell my wife. Right? But the dirty truth is, by the time you're in your cars and pulling out of that deal up there, I'm probably going to be licking the icing off my fingers. Because it'll just be me and the donut. because I'm alone. And that's what happens with you too. You're emotionally alone. You don't have friends that you confide in. Well, sure, you have people you talk about the weather and sports with, but you don't have people that you really talk about the stuff of life with, and so you're alone. And you fall to temptation. You're distant from your spouse. Sure, you're living in the same house and you talk about who's picking up the kids and who's going to handle the yard and those kinds of things, but you're emotionally distant from your spouse. And when that begins to happen, you are more susceptible to temptation. Some of you are literally alone. You are traveling for business. Need I say more? You are the only person at work who runs the books and no one else really holds you accountable or looks at it. They all just trust you. And you are, in effect, alone. And when you are alone, that is when temptation will rear its ugly head. You know when else temptation comes? It's when you are physically weak. Jesus was hungry after 40 days of fasting. Man, I can imagine. The 12-step groups are recovery communities. We have a bunch of them in this church. If you need help with something like that, divorce care, grief recovery, alcoholism, porn addiction, whatever it is, you come and you talk to us. We will get you the help that you need. But do you know what those recovery communities will teach us? Halt. They'll say, you know when temptation comes? It's when you're hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. And now, as you read through that list again, sort of to yourself, you're going, yeah, you know what? It was when I was angry. That's when I said the stuff that got me into trouble. And yeah, you know what? It was when I was feeling lonely that I reached out and I did that. That's where it all started. Right? When you're hungry, angry, lonely, and tired, you're physically weak. And then the last one for when temptation comes is when you're in the wrong place. Jesus goes out to the desert in our story. The Greek word here is eremos. It correlates to the Old Testament desert or wilderness. It's the same place that the Israelites, when they wouldn't follow God into the promised land, he cast them out to spend 40 days 40 years wandering in the wilderness. And the Bible sets up the wilderness, the eremos, as a place of danger, chaos, and alienation. And how many times do we find ourselves in places of danger, chaos, and alienation? And sure enough, that's when temptation happens. It's the alcoholic who says, well, I can't skip the guy's bachelor party. We've known each other since high school. Don't let yourself be in the wrong place. It's the high school senior who says, you know what, I got 4 options for college. All of them have my program that I'm looking for, but this one I just read in a magazine, it's like the #1 party school in the Midwest. So listen, I'm not going to go crazy, but we all know what college is for, and so he finds himself in the wrong place. You put yourself in the wrong place, and temptation's going to rear its ugly head. You heard about the guy that went to the doctor. He said, I broke my arm in 2 places. The doctor said, well, stay away from those 2 places. All right. Listen, laugh at that because I don't have too many jokes today. I just got to be honest. All right. So here we go. When? How about where? What about where? I mean, if I know when it's coming, I can be ready. But what if I know where it's coming from, the source of it? It's hard to fix a problem if you don't know the source of the problem. My last car had one of those little computers that would tell you your fuel economy. And sure enough, I would get like 23, 24 miles per gallon. And then at some point while I was driving my car, I noticed it was going down to like 14 and 15. Like, what is going on? So I go in and I pump up the tires, put the tire pressure where it's supposed to be because I know that can affect it, right? Go back on the road. Still, I'm getting 14, 15 miles per gallon. That's not it. So I take it to a mechanic. I said, do what you need to do. He's like, well, we probably need to do, the fuel injectors or the spark plugs or the flux capacitor or whatever, because I don't speak car. And he's in there saying, let's do that. We'll clean it out. And then you can put this little additive in your gas or whatever. And so I do that. And I spend money and time. And I pull out of there and I go out and sure enough, 14, 15 miles per gallon. That's not it. So I take it back in. I said, man, something is going on. I read on the internet. It could be the alignment. He said, it could be the alignment. Give me your money. So I give him my money again. And so he tries to do the alignment, gives me an alignment on the car. I take it back out. And sure enough, it's like the third or fourth time I take it in. He goes, oh, guess what, dude? You hit a pothole and your caliper is rubbing on your rotor. That's what was going on. It was like I was braking the entire time. No wonder I'm getting bad fuel economy. But here's the deal. I could have worked on the tires. I worked on the alignment. I worked on all that. I got to get at the root of what's going on. So where does temptation come from in our lives? Well, let me give you a couple things. One, our human condition. Jesus is fully God and fully man. It's amazing. It's a miracle. But he is. He's fully God and fully man. That's why, as fully man, he got tired. He got hungry. He was hungry in our story. God created us with these needs. He makes it so that you need water and food and air. And that your spirit has needs as well. You need to be loved. You need to belong. You need to feel like you matter, like you're succeeding, like you're achieving something in life. We all have these needs. And those things are good. They've been given to you by God so that you will always be led back to him to depend on him for everything. That's the way it's supposed to be. Now, what happens is we will circumvent God to meet our needs. And that's when temptation strikes. That's when things get messed up. So when I have a need for peace, I have a need to not be so stressed out. I'm supposed to, Philippians 4 says, bring my petitions to God with thanksgiving, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard my heart and mind in Christ Jesus. That's the way it's supposed to happen. But if I instead, when I'm stressed out, go to Dunkin' Donuts and worship at the church of carbs, that's messed up. If I go to alcohol, if I go to porn, if I escape into shopping or escape into movies, or whatever I would do that circumvents God, that's where temptation and destruction begins to happen. Does that make sense? Let me keep going. I'll tell you why it's important. I had a lady call me up and she said, hey, I want you to do our wedding. I said, okay, that'd be great. I normally do some premarital counseling. She said, oh, honey, I've been married 3 times. Ain't nothing you're going to be able to tell me about marriage. Here's a lady who has a need for love and companionship. Here's a lady who's gone to this relationship and this relationship and this relationship and this relationship to find it. I don't know how many other guys she hadn't gotten married to that she'd been in relationship with. And if I came to her and I said, this is wrong and this is going to be a temptation, if she got it in her mind, yeah, this is wrong and I shouldn't feel the temptation to go after another relationship, yet she is going to be the whole time dealing with this urge, this need inside of her for love and companionship. And so she may at some point go, well, I can't fight the desire, so I might as well go for it. What she needs to understand is that God has put those desires in you. That's not wrong. It's just that you need to figure out to go to him and do it his way to get it fulfilled. Does that make sense? And that'll help you deal with temptation. Do you know where else temptation comes from? In John 10:10 it says, Jesus said, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. But I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. Peter is going to say that the devil prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. If you look at our story today, where does the temptation come from? It's Satan trying to tempt you. Now, I don't know if this resonates with everybody in the room, but this is so huge for me. This helps me with temptation, because when I know that there's somebody out there who's trying to drag me down, who's trying to defeat me, who's trying to rob me, who's trying to beat me, guess what? I'm flipping competitive. I don't want Satan to win. And so when I think about the fact that he's trying to drag me down, I'm like, no, I'm not falling to that temptation. We had vision night a couple of weeks ago, and we had all of our leaders and all of our volunteers. It was like 200, 400, I think it was like 400 people that came in, and we were casting the vision for the future of our church over the next year, 2 years. Literally a vision that through church planting and growing this deal and growing Ann Arbor and everything that we want to do in Haiti and different countries, tens of thousands of people could be affected for Jesus. Now, don't you think that Satan kind of perks up and looks at that? Well, I do, because guess what? That week, our lead team, like our staff team, somebody gets bad news at home. Another person's overwhelmed with an issue they're dealing with. Somebody else has a health issue. That vision night, people walked out of there pumped and ready to go. I almost had to carry my lead team out. And I sent an email that night. I just said, guys, you need to understand this. This is Satan. He's attacking us. And the best days of your life and the best days of this church are ahead. And guess what? Guess what? They are. Satan's not going to drag us down, because, if for anything else, because I'm just competitive and I'm not going to let him win. And God says, he who is in us is greater than he who is in the world. We're going to have victory. It's awesome. Anyway, all right, let me give you the third one. The third place where temptation will come from. Now, this is Theology 401. So you got to hang with me on this, okay? All right, here's how it goes. Did you notice in the story who led Jesus out into the desert to be tempted? He goes, oh, Satan. No, read it again. It said the Spirit, capital S, God led Jesus out into the wilderness to be tempted. He said, wait, that doesn't seem right. That seems like that goes against God's nature. God doesn't tempt people. You're right, God doesn't tempt people. But God will lead people into an environment where they can be tempted. Hold on, I said, what? Yeah, listen to what Jesus taught us to pray. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, right? Forgive us our trespasses. And lead us not into temptation, God. Why ever pray that prayer? Except for the fact that we have a God who treats us like you treat your kids. You'll send your kids to high school someday. Do you know what you're doing? You're leading them into temptation. Do you know why you do it? You know that, right? You all went to high school. There's drugs. There's kids sleeping around. There's kids cutting themselves. It's a rough environment. Yet all of you, loving parents, will send your kids. Not all of you, but most of you. And when you do that, you're leading them into temptation. Why? For the same reasons that God will do it. Because one, He believes that you have everything you need to succeed. When I send my kid to school, I'm going, you know what? I believe that, yeah, they're going to encounter temptations, but I believe they're mature enough. I believe I'm going to support them. I believe they're going to figure it out and they're going to win. I would never send my kid into something that I know they're going to lose. So I send them in there, and the other reason that I send them in is because of the greater good. I want them to get an education. I want them to mature. I want them even to build up their saying no to temptation muscles while they're in the safety of my household. And so I lead my kids into temptation, and you'll do the same thing. And God will do that as well. Now, that's what God does for Christians. You know why God leads non-Christians into temptation? Because non-Christians don't have what it takes. They're not strong enough. They don't have Jesus living inside them, and so they will fall on their face. And when they do, God is hoping that will motivate them to go, oh my gosh, I am unfulfilled. There's something missing in my heart. I keep trying to do it my way and it's not working. And God is going, yes, now come and follow me. And God is hoping that will happen. So understand that God will lead us into temptation from time to time. I did it with my son the other night, 12 years old. And I let him watch with me the TV version of Braveheart. Now, why would I do that? It's a TV version, so there wasn't as much nasty. They take some of the nasty out. But there was still some cuss words. Do I want my son walking around saying cuss words? There was violence. Do I want my son going around chopping people up with axes? No, I don't. But I did believe that he was mature enough to handle a little bit of that. And I did want him to catch the greater good, which for me was, I want you to feel and experience one of the greatest examples of uncompromising leadership, self-sacrificing leadership there is in a movie. And so we watched that thing together. And I'm telling you, I think it was a win. Now, he has been running around the house in a skirt and blue makeup. But, I don't always get it right. Okay, I didn't see that coming. No, I'm just kidding. Obviously, I'm kidding. Okay. The when of temptation, so I can be ready for it. The where, so I understand the source of it. And then, you know what? Let me tell you why. Not why you're tempted, but why you need to resist. If you're like me, you will say things like, hey, it's just one donut. You'll say things like, well, it doesn't matter that much. I'll start my diet tomorrow. Do you know the most popular day of the year to start a diet, right? Tomorrow. You got it. So I'll start it tomorrow. And then tomorrow leads to tomorrow, and one donut leads to four, and you know what I'm saying? Those things happen. Guys, I want you to know that every choice you make matters. Every choice you make matters. Jeremiah 29. But before we get there, look at what Jesus, Satan's going to tempt him to have a little bread. And you're like, well, he's just going to eat some bread. It's a little sin, no big deal. But if Jesus eats a bite of bread, he becomes sinful. And when he becomes sinful, he disqualifies himself from hanging on the cross and taking the punishment for our sins and conquering sin and death. Do you know what was at stake for Jesus in a little piece of bread? Do you know what's at stake in our lives? Jeremiah 29:11 says, I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. And every time I take a bite of that donut, guys, every time that you guys do your thing, you are taking a bite out of your future. Not just your future. What about your family? People watch you. People watch you at work. People follow you. Maybe they're nieces or nephews. Maybe your kids are watching you. The decisions you make with your money and the decisions you make with your time and the priorities you have with your family. Your kids are watching that and they are soaking it all up. So the choices you make, it matters whether or not you resist temptation or not. Not just your future or your family, but what about your faith? The story that I hear over and over and over in this room, and I'm not going to make you raise your hand, but I bet a bunch of people would be like, yep, that's me. And it's this, that you grew up and you went to VBS, or you went to church with your grandma, or even with your family or whatever. And then there was a time in your life where you just sort of fell away and you didn't follow God anymore. You didn't go to church. You just didn't really, and then you still believed in him, but he just wasn't that important to you, and it certainly didn't make a difference in your decision making, and you just kind of fell away. And now, for whatever reason, you're coming back. I hear that story so often. I don't know why, but that's the way it is. Can I say this to you? You probably did not think your way out of a relationship with God. You probably did not hit 18, 19, 21 years old and say, you know what? I think I'm agnostic now. I think I'm an atheist now. You probably didn't have some theological shift. You did not think your way out of a relationship with God. You behaved your way out of a relationship with God. Because at 19, you started drinking. Or at 25, you started sleeping around. Or whatever time you stopped going to church. Or you stopped doing this, or you started doing that, or whatever it was, and you just found yourself with every sort of decision to fall to temptation, you just took a little step away from God. And in the beginning, it was just one time. But then you found yourself doing it again and again and again. And next thing you know, there's such a distance between you and God. And if that's you, Jesus told a story in Luke 15. I just want to tell you, there's good news. Because Jesus told a story about a kid that looked at his dad and just went away, took his inheritance, and just sort of turned his back on his dad. And this kid went out and he spent the inheritance and he basically hit rock bottom. He had nothing, was nothing. And it started to dawn on him that, you know what, I have it, like the servants at my dad's house have it better. I'll go back and just ask dad to hire me. So he's on his way back and he's rehearsing his apology. He's rehearsing, how he's going to tell dad he's so sorry. And next thing you know, his dad sees him in a distance. And he doesn't sit there and kind of cross his arms and get ready to wag the finger. He gets up. Jesus said that the dad runs to the kid. If you're far from God right now, I think God is not sitting on his throne shaking his finger at you, disgusted at you. I think he's running to you right now. Because that dad, Jesus said, wrapped his arms around his son. He said, my son was dead. Now he's alive. Like I thought he was gone, but he's back. And he said, you know what? Let's have a party. And the son's just like, well, what about this? And I got to say, I'm sorry for that. And the dad's just like, I'm so excited you're back. I think that's what God would say to you, no matter how you've fallen to temptation.